If you had seen me that night stepping onto the manicured lawn in my charcoal suit, you would have assumed I was just another late guest. Someone important, maybe, confident, calm, invisible in the right way. You would have been wrong. I wasn't invited. And this wasn't just a party. It was my father's 70th birthday. White lights wrapped the oak trees. A string quartet hummed near the patio. Champagne flutes clinked as laughter rose and fell like waves. Over 100 people, bank executives, city officials, polished strangers, celebrating a man who taught me early how easy it is to erase someone. I stood near the gate for a full 10 seconds before walking in. Long enough to decide this wasn't about revenge, it was about control. I spotted him instantly. Tall, even with age pressing on his shoulders. Silver hair, tailored blazer, the same practiced smile he used on clients when numbers mattered more than people. Beside him stood his wife, my mother by paperwork only, radiant and careful. And near the bar, my younger brother laughed too loudly, already halfway drunk on confidence that had never been earned. None of them saw me yet. Good. Because in my leather folder rested a single document worth more than everything being toasted tonight. A gift, he once told me, was the only thing that mattered in this world. Land. When my father tapped the microphone, the music softened. The crowd leaned in, eager for wisdom from a man who believed legacy could be measured in accounts and acreage. "I want to thank you all," he began, smiling. 70 years gives a man perspective. Then his eyes landed on me. The smile didn't change, but something sharpened behind it. "And since everyone's here," he continued, voice smooth, "I might as well clear up my estate plans." A ripple of interest, a few chuckles. "To my son," he said proudly, "everything goes to him. The house, the assets, the future." Applause. Then, almost casually, like an afterthought he'd been waiting years to say aloud, he added, "As for her, well, she isn't my biological child. I suppose I forgot to include her." Laughter exploded. Real laughter, easy laughter. The kind that lands because no one thinks it's cruel. Something inside my chest went still. That was the macro truth snapping into place. I was never meant to belong here. I walked forward anyway, one step, then another. By the time the laughter began to die, I was already at the table, placing my leather folder down between the birthday cake and his wine glass. And that's when I decided, whatever happened next would change all of us forever. The laughter didn't stop right away. It rolled over me in waves, polite at first, then louder, freer, as if my father had just delivered the punchline everyone secretly wanted. Glasses clinked. Someone snorted. A woman near the fountain covered her mouth, pretending to be shocked while enjoying it anyway. I stood there, hands resting lightly on the folder, feeling something unexpected settle in. Not pain, clarity. Because this wasn't new, this was just public. My brother leaned closer, grinning like he'd won something. "Wow," he said, loud enough for the people around us. "Guess that clears things up, huh?" He glanced at the folder. "You brought paperwork? That's adorable." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I finally understood the pattern. Every moment of my childhood rearranged itself with brutal precision. The forgotten birthdays, the quiet dinners, the way love always felt conditional, temporary, revocable. My father had never been cruel, he'd been efficient. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately. The sound of leather shifting was louder than it should have been. Conversations nearby thinned out, curiosity creeping in where mockery had been. I lifted the page, legal letterhead, county seal, parcel numbers. A few guests leaned closer. "I bought you something," I said. my voice steady enough to surprise even me. A lakeside property, untouched land, forest, water access, development rights. A pause. You always said land was the only thing that made a man matter. Silence spread like a stain. My father's smile finally faltered. Not fear yet, just calculation. He took a step forward, squinting. Is this some kind of stunt? This was the moment he still could have chosen differently. It was yours, I said. No conditions, no announcements, just respect. I looked around at the crowd, at the people who had laughed seconds ago. Then I tore the paper in half. Gasps, real ones. I tore it again and again, clean, sharp movements, the kind you practice in your head long before you ever need them. Scraps drifted down onto the white tablecloth, onto the cake, onto his hands. For the first time in my life, my father didn't speak. He stared at the pieces like they might rearrange themselves if he waited long enough. I didn't come to be named, I said quietly. I came to show you what you lost. Then I turned away, and as I walked past stunned faces and half-raised phones, I felt something lift off my shoulders. Not anger, expectation. Behind me, someone whispered a number. Another voice asked, "Did she say millions?" And for the first time, the laughter didn't follow me. I didn't hear my heels on the driveway until I was already past the gate. The music restarted behind me. Too fast, too forced, like a band playing on a sinking ship. Someone laughed again, nervous this time, trying to stitch normalcy back together. It didn't work. I could feel it without looking back. I had cracked something open. I drove for nearly an hour before I realized my hands were shaking. Not from regret, from release. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't replay his face the way I thought I would. I went home, kicked off my shoes, sat at my desk fully dressed, and stared at the city lights until morning bled through the blinds. I thought that was the end of it. A clean exit, a closed door. I was wrong. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I let it ring out. Then came a text. "You don't know me. I was at the party. Please call me. You should know what happened after you left." My chest tightened. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. It convinces you that knowing won't reopen wounds. I called. Her voice was low, careful. She introduced herself as someone who worked with my father. Junior partner, quiet observer. She paused before speaking again. "When you left," she said, "no one moved. Your father just stood there." I said nothing. "He got down on his knees," she continued, "in front of everyone. He started picking up the pieces, one by one, like if he gathered them all, he could undo it." The room seemed to tilt. She told me guests began leaving early, that a board member called him a fool, that my brother tried to joke it off and failed, that my mother kept saying we didn't know like a prayer no one believed. When the call ended, I sat in silence again. Different this time. Heavier. A week passed, then 2. Then a letter arrived. Real paper. Handwritten. No return address. He wrote that he failed me. That he saw it now. That the pieces on his desk weren't just paper. The apology I waited for my entire life came only after I stopped needing it. I didn't write back. Instead, I took the letter and slid it into an old folder, behind a childhood sketch of a building I once dreamed of owning. Because some things arrive too late to change anything, and some endings are only the beginning of something much bigger. I didn't answer the letter because answering would have meant reopening a door I'd spent years sealing shut. Instead, I went back to work. That Monday morning, I stood on a half-finished site overlooking the bay, wind tugging at my jacket, sunlight flashing off exposed steel beams. The crew waited for instructions. Blueprints were spread across the hood of a truck. Concrete dust hung in the air. This was the life no one at that party knew about. I hadn't been handed anything, not money, not connections, not forgiveness dressed up as opportunity. I paid my way with night shifts, skipped meals, and the kind of loneliness that teaches you discipline or destroys you. In my case, it did both. After college, I stayed in the city that never asked where I came from. I worked the jobs nobody wanted, took projects everyone said were impossible, and learned how to turn rejection into data. Every no refined me. Every closed door taught me how to build my own entrance. By the time I started my firm, I had nothing but a laptop, a folding desk, and an idea I couldn't shake. Buildings shouldn't make people feel small. The first year almost broke me. Clients disappeared. Permits stalled. I lived on canned soup and stubbornness. More than once I hovered over job applications I swore I'd never submit. Each time I remembered the laugh. The one from the party. The one that said you don't count. So I kept going. The breakthrough came from a woman everyone else ignored. Single mother. Drought-stricken land. No budget anyone respected. I gave her a design that made sense instead of money. Reclaimed materials. Passive cooling. Solar stitched into the roofline like it belonged there. When her house stood, quiet, strong, unapologetic, it changed everything. Phones started ringing. Not because I was flashy, because I was different. I built a team, then a reputation, then a rule I never broke. We don't build for ego, we build for belonging. That rule followed me all the way to the idea that came after the letter, the one that finally made everything click. Because if land was what my father valued most, then land was exactly where I would plant something he could never own. The idea didn't arrive like inspiration usually does. It came quietly while I was reviewing budgets at midnight, the letter still unopened on my desk for the third week in a row. I stared at a satellite image on my screen. Trees, elevation lines, water nearby, and felt something lock into place. Land wasn't power. Purpose was. I closed the letter without reading it again and opened a new file instead. The plot I bought sat miles from anywhere my father had ever mattered. No banks, no boards, no applause. Just slope, soil, wind, and space. The kind of land that didn't care who your family was, only what you built on it. The paperwork moved fast. Faster than emotions ever do. Lawyers asked questions. Accountants double-checked numbers. No one asked why. That part was mine. I announced the project to my team a week later. No press, no donor names. Just a mission. A self-sustaining community center designed for people who'd aged out, burned out, or been written off. Solar roofs. Open classrooms. Gardens that fed the building back. Spaces meant to be occupied, not admired. A place that said you belong without asking for proof. Some investors walked away. I didn't care. Construction took a year. Weather delays, permit battles, skeptics. Through it all, the letter stayed sealed. A quiet weight I carried without touching. Opening day came without ceremony, no ribbon, no speeches. Kids showed up first, curious, cautious, then parents, then mentors. The building did what it was designed to do. It held. One afternoon, a teenage girl with sharp eyes and a guarded voice asked me, "You really built this?" I nodded. Even without a family, I smiled. Especially without one. She hugged me like it mattered. That night, wind rolled through the trees, rattling the glass just enough to remind me I was alive. I thought about my father, not with anger, not with hope, but as a closed chapter that finally made sense. The letter stayed in its folder. Some apologies are meant to be archived, not answered. And standing there, watching people fill a space that never would have existed if I'd stayed silent, I knew. I hadn't lost anything that night. I had planted it. The letter stayed where I put it. Weeks turned into months, and then into a year, and still it remained pressed between old sketches and faded notes from a younger version of me, who believed success would finally earn love. Every time I opened that folder, I felt the same calm certainty. I wasn't that girl anymore. People like to think closure is loud, tears, reunions, words that land perfectly and fix what time broke. But real closure is quieter. It's waking up and realizing you're no longer rehearsing conversations that will never happen. Life moved forward because it always does. The community center, Haven, as the kids named it, started filling with stories. Real ones, messy ones. A former foster kid who slept in his car while learning graphic design. A single mom who ran the garden like it was sacred ground. Teenagers who stayed late just because no one rushed them out. Every brick felt heavier than money. Then, one afternoon, my assistant told me someone had been calling. Old number, persistent, my father. My stomach didn't drop. I told her not to answer. He tried emails next, then messages through relatives I barely remembered. Each one carried the same tone. Careful, regretful, tentative. As if saying the wrong thing might break me again. He didn't understand the irony. I was only breakable when I needed him. The last message came from my aunt, short, uncharacteristically honest. He drives past the property sometimes, doesn't go in, just parks and watches. I deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but because it changed nothing. The man who once believed land defined worth now stood outside something he could never enter. On the first anniversary of Haven, we held a small gathering. No speeches, just food, music, laughter that didn't ask permission. I watched a group of teenagers paint over an old mural with something brighter. No one asked whose building it was. That's when I finally took the letter out again. I read it once more. Slowly. Then I folded it, placed it back in the folder, and slid the folder into a storage box labeled Archive. Not trash, not forgiveness. History. That night, as I locked up and stepped into the cool air, I felt something settle fully for the first time. Some people spend their lives chasing acknowledgment. Others build places where acknowledgment is unnecessary. I drove home knowing exactly which one I was. The first time I saw him again wasn't dramatic. No confrontation, no words, just a reflection. I was leaving a city meeting, new zoning approval, another project moving forward, when I caught sight of a familiar posture across the street. Shoulders slightly hunched now, hands clasped behind his back the way he used to stand when he thought authority lived in stillness. My father. He hadn't aged well since the party. Or maybe I'd just finally stopped seeing him through a child's eyes. He didn't cross the street, didn't wave, didn't call my name. He was waiting to be noticed. I kept walking. That night, the call finally came through. Not blocked, not disguised, just his number, sitting there on my screen like it had every right to be. I let it ring. The voicemail was short, careful, almost respectful. "I won't keep trying," he said. "I just wanted you to know. I see it now, what you built, who you became." I deleted it without replaying. Not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too late. Recognition after abandonment isn't healing. It's haunting. At Haven, life kept unfolding without him. A grant came through, a new wing broke ground. Kids argued over paint colors and stayed late on purpose. I watched them claim space the way I never could in that house with the white fence. One evening, the same girl who'd hugged me months ago sat beside me on the steps. "Do you ever miss them?" she asked. I thought about my answer longer than she expected. I miss who I thought they were, I said, not who they chose to be. She nodded, like she understood more than she should at her age. That was when it hit me. The final twist I hadn't planned. The story was never about proving my worth to the people who raised me. It was about breaking a pattern before it raised anyone else. And somewhere, deep down, I knew the past wasn't done trying to speak. I just wasn't listening anymore. The trouble with silence is that people mistake it for an invitation. 2 months after I saw him across the street, my assistant told me someone was waiting in the lobby. No name, no appointment, just waiting. I already knew. I didn't rush. I finished the email I was writing, saved the file, shut down my computer. Every step I took felt deliberate, like approaching a line I had drawn years ago and never intended to cross. He stood when he saw me. Older, smaller. The suit was still tailored, but it hung differently now, like it belonged to a role he no longer played. His eyes searched my face the way mine once searched his. "Emma," he said. He said my name correctly. I didn't invite him to sit. I didn't ask why he was here. "You built something extraordinary," he continued, voice unsteady but controlled. "I drive past sometimes. I see the lights, the people." "I know," I said. "You don't go in." That landed harder than I expected. He swallowed. I didn't think it was my place. For the first time, he was right. We stood there, years compressed into a few feet of space. Finally, he asked the question that told me everything. "What do you want from me?" Not, "Can I fix this?" Not, "How do I make it right?" But what would satisfy me? I felt something soften. Not toward him, but toward myself. "I don't want anything," I said. "That's the point." He looked confused, lost, like a man whose currency had suddenly been outlawed. "I came," he said quietly, "because I thought maybe you still needed a father." I met his eyes, steady, honest. "No," I replied. "I needed one a long time ago." Silence stretched between us, clean and final. "I hope you find peace," I added, "not as forgiveness, but as closure." He nodded once, slowly, then turned and walked out without another word. As the door closed behind him, I realized something profound. The power dynamic had flipped so completely that there was nothing left to say. And for the first time since childhood, that felt like enough. After he left, nothing dramatic happened. No collapse, no tears, no sudden sense of victory, just space. I stood alone in the lobby for a moment, listening to the hum of the building, the quiet efficiency of something that worked without him. Then I went back upstairs and finished my day. That was the strangest part. Life didn't pause to honor the moment. At Haven, the weeks rolled on. A new mentorship program launched. A donor tried to attach their name to a wing. I said no. A teenager got accepted into a college she didn't think she deserved. We celebrated with cheap cupcakes and loud music that echoed off the concrete walls. Belonging doesn't need polish. One evening, I found myself laughing, really laughing, with a group of kids who had nothing in common except the fact that no one had shown up for them when it mattered. The sound startled me. It felt earned. That night, alone in my apartment, I pulled out the old sketch again. The one I drew as a teenager, the dream house, the impossible lines, the version of me that believed stability was something other people handed you. I compared it to what I'd actually built, and I understood something I'd missed before. I hadn't just escaped my past. I had outgrown it. My father never came back, not to Haven, not to my office. He didn't send another letter or leave another message. From what I heard, secondhand, distant, he sold the house with the white fence. Retired, quietly, shrunk into a life that no longer made room for certainty. He didn't lose me that night at the party. He lost me the moment he taught me I was optional, and I learned how to live without being chosen. Standing on the balcony one evening, city lights stretching out like a promise, I realized the final irony. The legacy he wanted was land. The legacy I built was people, and people don't tear that away. The last time I thought about my father, it wasn't with anger. It was with distance. Haven had been open for just over a year when a winter storm rolled through the mountains, heavy and sudden. Snow buried the access road overnight. Power lines went down across the county. Phones buzzed with alerts and warnings. Haven stayed lit. Solar reserves held. Backup systems kicked in exactly as designed. Inside, the building filled with people. Locals, teenagers, families who had nowhere else to go. We made soup, passed blankets. Let the storm rage without us. I stood near the glass wall watching snow pile up against something I'd built with intention, and I felt it then, the final shift. I was no longer reacting to my past. I was responding to my present. Someone asked me once if I regretted tearing up the deed. I didn't. Because land can be owned, but purpose can't be taken back once it's lived. I never heard from my father again, no final letter, no dramatic ending, just absence, quiet and complete, and that was fitting. He had always believed value came from possession. I learned it comes from permanence. One afternoon, years later, a girl I'd mentored stood where I once stood, graduation cap crooked, eyes unsure. She asked me if she could really make it on her own. I told her the truth. "You don't need permission to build a life," I said. "You just need to stop waiting for someone to claim you." She nodded and walked forward. That was when I understood what legacy actually was. Not land, not money, not names on documents, but the moment someone realizes they were never optional. And that was the only inheritance I ever wanted to leave behind.